Fuck pain. Fuck heartbreak. I'm still in love with life.
From the multicultural headquarters of the future capital of the free-thinking states of America known as Los Angeles, this is the Drunken Taoist Podcast. Tonight, it's interview time again, as we are joined by endocannabinoid researcher Gregory Gerdeman as he shares with us amazing progress of research on THC and CBDs inside the amazing cannabis plant, and how his research is being hamstrung by policies dating back to the 70s that place cannabis as a Schedule I drug with no medicinal benefits, while alcohol remains perfectly legal. The research shows the complete opposite. This is going to make you mad. And now, asking you all to spread the words that corporations are not persons, I'm Rich Evers. And my partner in crime, the savage philosopher and middle finger of the gods, Daniele Bolelli, as we invite you to lower the lights, batten down the hatches, and prepare to open your mind. For the Drunken Taoist Podcast begins now. Welcome back, everybody. Episode 93 of the Drunken Taoist Podcast. Another great interview today. It's a long one, and we're going to get straight to it. Bolelli's back next week as we get a regular episode of he and I together. So we're definitely looking forward to that. But very quickly, a special thanks to our friends at Datsusera Bags, our first sponsor. Amazing hemp gear, backpacks, gis, all sorts of incredible things. Check them out at dsgear.com. We love the hemp fiber, especially with this episode. Our friends at Onnit. Oh, and IT, superfoods, buffalo jerkies, that amazing workout mace, and 1,000 other awesome products that are made for human optimization. Check out their website. You're certainly to find something to pique your curiosity and order some stuff, and be sure to tell them your friends at the Drunken Taoist sent you. And of course, our pals over in Thailand at Sure Design T-shirts, making awesome soft T-shirts, and our amazing collection of shirts. There'll probably be a new one coming out not too far away, because it's going to be year 5, if you can believe that. And of course, our friends at Kiva.org. $25 can help a stranger out and make their life better in a million different ways. Check out the site, see some story that kind of tugs at your heart, and send them a little money. And when the $25 gets returned, it goes right back into your pocket. So that's a quick intro. We got to get things going because this is a pretty long interview, and it does get a bit sciencey, but you know, it's amazing, fascinating what's available to us now that's being completely denied to the people. So it should make you pretty upset. It definitely got me a little bit pissed about the whole situation. And a quick apology. This is a Skype interview. For the most part, it's pretty good, but it does have some dropouts here and there. And that's just how it is. It's the only way we could get hooked up with Greg. And, well, you'll hear it for yourself in just a second, because here it comes.
Today with us, Greg Gerdeman, or something close to it. Well, you guys know that I can't pronounce a damn word in English or any related language anyway, so, you know, sorry, Greg, for screwing up your name. I was thinking maybe it makes more sense rather than me trying to sum up all the stuff that you do and who you are. Maybe if you want to give our listener a little bit of background about yourself. I notice sometimes when I'm a guest on podcasts, people, they sum up who you are, and I'm always like, yeah, that's not really it, or no, that's not really. So I'm like, might as well. I'll shut up and I'll let you do it. So if you want to tell our listener what you're about, what your work about, the whole story, please go.
I sometimes go a little bit long when I'm talking about such things, but it's a pleasure to be talking to you, Daniele. This is my first real podcast. I'm excited about it.
Ooh, we have a real podcast.
Nice.
That's right. It's a real podcast. I'm in the podosphere now. I am calling from sunny St. Petersburg, Florida, where I am assistant professor of biology at Eckerd College in St. Pete. And I am a guy who studies cannabis and the endocannabinoid system. I fancy myself a endocannabinoid researcher, which I can talk about, flesh out. But you and I started talking a little bit around some issues about cannabis as medicine, medical marijuana, and it's a tide, a surging sea change of public opinion and policy in the country, and that's something that I'm really aware of and involved in and think about a lot. My background is scientific. I got a PhD in pharmacology from Vanderbilt University in 2001, and that was a study looking at how cannabis works in the brain, how the system of cannabinoid receptors, as we call them, controls the release of neurotransmitters in the brain. So I've been studying this for a long time. I mean, for 20 years, I've had the sort of opportunity of when you have that first momentary conversation with someone for the first time and they ask what you do, it always ends up into a conversation about cannabis or neuroscience, and both of those things are endlessly fascinating to me. So I have had the good fortune.
I think right there, when you go into the, you talk about cannabis, everybody on earth know what you're talking about.
Glaucoma and anxiety.
When you talk about the endocannabinoid system, that's a whole different story. Most people are maybe not familiar with what you're talking about. So if you can give maybe a layman quick, brief sum up so that people can catch up with us and be part of the conversation in regard to what you do as research. What's going on with this system?
For sure. And, when I started grad school in 95, I wouldn't have known what cannabis was. Nowadays, especially someplace like California, if you talk to somebody about cannabis or marijuana, they know that you're talking about the same thing, because the level of and really everywhere the word cannabis is now recognized, even though that's been the scientific nomenclature since the time of Linnaeus. It wasn't in the public discourse, and now our public discourse has matured, not nearly as mature as it should be, but so cannabis is the name of the plant, and in the early 60s, 1964 or so, when the active compound of cannabis, the so-called psychoactive active compound THC, was discovered and identified structurally, it became called a cannabinoid. So cannabinoid is a term that refers to these family of molecules, several dozen of them, that are found in the cannabis plant and really nowhere else on the planet, and that's been studied for some 60 years. How does cannabis work in the brain, in the body? And much of the focus is on the brain because it was motivated by understanding, it was motivated from a drug abuse paradigm. Cannabis makes you crazy and it makes you addicted. And for the better part of half a century, the only federal research dollars that went to studying cannabis was not at all related to how it could make you well, but how it was a danger to your mind and your sanity, and could cause cancer.
Right.
Whereas we now, in a growing tour de force of research, are looking into how it could prevent or cure cancers. But there's cannabinoids, active components from the plant. THC and cannabidiol, CBD, are now the two most talked about, and they are the most prominent. But starting in the very late 80s, early 90s, some very key discoveries were made of what we call the endocannabinoid system, meaning it was discovered how THC acts on cells in the brain. It binds to certain cell surface receptors, all of your neurons, your cells in your brain. It's all drugs work, and hormones and neurotransmitters. They bind to these little receptor molecules on the cell surface.
Are they exclusive, though? I mean, is it like a key into one lock that exact receptor is for that exact chemical, or can they take different ones? I mean, I always hear, my DNA needs THC, man, because of the whole receptor idea. But so various chemicals could make their way in through the same receptor.
Well, it depends. I mean, this is how all pharmacology works. And when you have like a different synthetic drugs or natural products, sometimes they are extremely selective for specific receptors. And the analogy, the metaphor of the drug being a key that fits into a lock is a pretty classic textbook description.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a perfect description because molecules on your cells are not solid little metal keys. They're things that move and wiggle and flex around. And so THC can bind to the cannabinoid receptor, the so-called CB1 receptor on the brain cells, but some other molecules can too, including molecules that were discovered, isolated from brain tissue around 1994, that act as endogenous, natural activators of the receptor. So the receptor in some ways is promiscuous in that it will be activated by THC. It is activated normally by these molecules that we now call endogenous cannabinoids or endocannabinoids.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a whole system of regulating cellular function throughout the body. So there are drugs that have been synthetically created by molecular chemists that are more highly selective for, say, a cannabinoid receptor. THC actually can activate a number of different receptor pathways, and the receptor in turn gets activated by a molecule called anandamide, the first endocannabinoid, the first THC-like molecule that was discovered, and another one called 2-AG, which is a little bit more of a stereochemical sounding name, 2-arachidonyl glycerol. 2-AG and anandamide, these are the two major endocannabinoids, our body's THC-like molecules. And the name anandamide is a nice story that people that are aware of the field will be well aware of, but it comes from the Sanskrit ananda, meaning an internal bliss, and the chemical structure is an amide, referring to its a nitrogen-containing chemical group. So it's sort of a bliss amide molecule. I love that worked its way into that discovery. So we have in our bodies, all vertebrate animals have in our bodies these molecules that we have evolved as regulators of neural function and other tissue functions throughout the body. And the cannabis plant evolved a rather different set of molecules that folds up in a way that it mimics these endocannabinoids, and it communicates with us in that way and influences our bodies in that way. So when one talks about the endocannabinoid system, we're talking about the receptors that were discovered in a quest to understand how THC works.
Mm-hmm.
And there are two real primary ones. They're not the only ones, but with a CB1 receptor, it's primarily located in the nervous system in the brain and also peripheral nerves, but it's also pops up in interesting places like the gut and in tumor cells and in pigment cells, melanocytes of the skin. And the CB2 receptor, it was originally called the immune cell receptor because it is present in the immune system. Virtually every circulating white blood cell, cells of the circulating immune system, can express CB2 receptors. And so the immune system is just as heavily regulated by this endocannabinoid system or endocannabinoid mechanism as the brain is.
Which I guess is where marijuana as medicine comes in. The whole discussion of how some of these chemicals within the plant can affect the body with healing results. So kind of shifting the paradigm away from how marijuana will fuck you up, which by now, there's plenty of evidence that all the sort of scare tactics of the early days were largely made up, versus now how can this be a medicine? How does this work? It's not even a does it work? Because, of course, there's a ton of anecdotal evidence. There's a ton of beginning scientific studies done. But now, like, getting more into the scientific studies of how does it really work? In which way? What's the difference between the way THC-heavy strains versus CBD-heavy strains? How do they affect the body? And I think that's where I would love you to take us next is... because, again, most people have a passing knowledge, and I'm definitely assuming that most of our listeners have a passing knowledge of what we're talking about, but clearly probably two are super deep into the real science of it all. So if you can give us an informed layman version about the differences between what you have seen in the way THC operates and in medical ways, in which CBD-heavy strains operate in medical ways, kind of give us what's the status right now, in the eyes of, in your eyes as a scientist, where are we at with the understanding of marijuana as medicine?
Well, we are in various different places because of how scattered and patchwork the nation is. Just to keep it of the United States,
sure,
But
sure.
You're quite right. I mean, from just a scientific perspective, going to international scientific meetings where people study the biology of cannabinoids and talking to people in big pharma that have research dedicated to this. I mean, the paradigm shifted these 30 years ago, that scientific papers in the 1980s, you didn't have a paper about THC that didn't start with some paragraph about its dangerous nature.
Right.
And would end with some disclaimer about how, dangerous it is. And, in California, you guys are in 2016. In Florida, we're kind of in 1986. You cannot take for granted that, especially someone who's a lawmaker in Tallahassee, that they know anything about this.
Right.
But even physicians too, a whole lot of physicians, 2 generations or 3 generations of physicians have been trained in this notion that there's nothing medical about marijuana, that it is a drug of abuse, and that's the only way you file it away. And so the basics of the dialogue are not there. And so there's a lot to talk about. You mentioned a sort of a paradigm shift, and really part of the challenge, part of why cannabis policy has been dynamic and been controversial and been hard for some people to embrace, is because it's a paradigm flip. I mean, it flips the paradigm on its head. The public policy, the prohibition public policy, and how we teach our kids, how I was raised to learn about marijuana, is really got its modern roots in the Controlled Substance Act of 1970. And you certainly can go back to the Marijuana Tax Act in the late 30s and the sort of xenophobic, racist roots of prohibition there. But the Controlled Substance Act is the basis of the DEA's authority. It's the basis of our public policy now. And it classifies cannabis in the Schedule I, the most strictest category, which is a medical criteria, really. It makes a biomedical argument to be in status of Schedule I. The Controlled Substance Act says that marijuana has no accepted medical value and that it cannot be used safely under the supervision of a physician. And those are two, and also that there's a high risk for abuse. And at least 2 of those, well, really all 3 of them have no grounding in scientific or medical observation, and they really never have. So that paradigm has been deeply, deeply flawed, and yet we grew up in it. Physicians have been trained in it. Law enforcement have made the decisions of their lives and their career based on it, the judgments that have been made, and it's so completely flipped from the reality that we're now understanding, a lot of which we didn't know then. I mean, cannabis has been used as medicine for thousands of years. You could make the legitimate archaeological argument that it is the earliest medicinal plant, or at least among them. And that's just a fascinating set of ways to study. But still, it's just this modern research with the endocannabinoid system, tweaking and looking very closely at what these molecules do, what the system does to protect the brain. The endocannabinoid system, among other things, is a way in which the networks, the circuits, the cells at the cellular level of the brain protect themselves from too much excitation, rein in overexcitation. And in looking at those with the fine molecular and genetic tweezers we have as scientists these days, I mean, the therapeutic potential for cannabis that really, to our knowledge, was never understood before, we've been breaking lots of new ground about it. It's a paradigm flip, and advocates get so excited about it for lots of reasons. Maybe it has given their child's life back to them. Maybe they're just, I can get super excited just on the scientific literature of it. And you start talking to someone who's totally naive about marijuana being legit medicine, and you throw out this list of 20 different things that it could be useful for, and they're like, dude, slow down. You're just being hyperbolic. You don't know shit about this. But it's not hyperbolic, actually. There's tremendous scientific validity for many different uses of cannabis. Not just, the easiest one probably to talk spastic disorders like epilepsy, seizure disorders, because of what I just mentioned, that cells and circuits in the brain release these endocannabinoids as a way to tone down their excitation, to protect themselves from too much excitability. Because the electrical language of the brain that is so amazing and allows neural circuits to work also is dangerous to them if they get too active. And it's called excitotoxicity. That's what happens. It goes on with stroke. It goes on with uncontrolled epileptic seizures. And endocannabinoids, THC in particular, THC isn't an endocannabinoid. It's a phytocannabinoid, a plant cannabinoid. But THC in particular replicates, it supports, it mimics the endocannabinoids in the way of toning down that hyperexcitation. And that's therapeutic. But when we've studied the endocannabinoid system throughout, like in the immune system, or in the endocrine cells of the fat tissues, or in the lining of the gut with CB2 receptors, there comes to be an understanding, these endocannabinoids could be involved in regulating insulin release and sensitivity, and therefore could be useful. Some tweaking of the endocannabinoid system could be useful for various metabolic disorders and diabetes, peripheral pain that's related to diabetes and many other sources, be treated by cannabinoids, because the endocannabinoid system is normally controlling those things. I don't know. Get me back on track a little bit if I'm wandering from the...
One of the things that's interesting right now is that you brought up is the fact that there's such a difference between... right now, there are states that have acknowledged that marijuana has a medical value, and so they've been legalized for medical reasons. Never mind the places where it has also been legalized for recreational purposes, but, just sticking to the medicine argument. Whereas the federal law still goes back to the 1930s, where according to the federal law, marijuana is still Schedule 1. Not just even marijuana, cannabis as a whole. Even strains that have zero THC, that are purely industrial cannabis, are considered related to, and as such, the whole thing is outlawed.
Right.
And the idea being everything about the plant is bad, there is no medical value. So there's an obvious clash between the science as it's recognized at the federal level currently, and the science as it's recognized at the state level, and let alone the places where the research is actually being done, which is further away where the state is at. So there's this kind of weird dichotomy, because on one end we discuss on a growing level marijuana as medicine, and on another level still the federal law is stuck a century ago pretty much. And so there's that clash between the two.
It's completely incongruent.
Yeah.
The federal law doesn't line up with scientific observation, the evidence base at all.
What does it take to change it in that regard? Because obviously, by now, Whereas in the past, politicians usually, no politician is going to go out there to support something that has not enough public support. So it's like, yeah, great, I'm going to legalize marijuana and get a few hippie votes, and I'm going to lose a ton of conservative votes. Screw that, I'm not doing that. But by now, the support for marijuana legalization is at such a level that is not a minority position anymore. There really is not that much of a danger for a politician's career to endorse it and support it. And yet it seems that discussion at the federal level is still lagging behind. I understand this is more politics than science in that regard, but what's your read on that, and where do you think it's going?
Gosh, well, I think things are changing. They have to. There's going to be, before long, a majority of states in the United States of America that have some recognition of the legal, the legitimate medical status of cannabis. And now many of those states, like currently Florida, have this sort of low THC cannabidiol only rules that are quite problematic. We could talk about that in just a minute. But it's just so hard to believe that it's been maintained as long as it has, that it makes you a little cautious about prognosticating about where it could change. But and you talk about federal level not doing anything. This past few months, I don't remember the details, but Senator Bernie Sanders has introduced a bill to basically remove marijuana from the scheduling, which I think is actually the appropriate way to do it, and allow states more control to do what they're doing in this sort of patchwork experiment of state rights that's been going on. He can't even get a single sponsor, not among any Democrats, not among any.
What do you think of that?
Progressives.
Yeah, what do you think is going on there?
I'm not enough of a policy wonk to really know, honestly. I've gotten more involved with politics these last couple of years than I ever really wanted to. But it's beyond me that he doesn't have more sponsors.
Yeah.
I don't quite get that. What on one level, the pragmatic sense of what would it take to change? My understanding is that the president could, by executive order, instruct, I guess, Health and Human Services, FDA, to remove cannabis out of Schedule 1, to move it.
Yeah.
At least to Schedule 2, which is still, I think, quite inappropriate to the fact that, cannabis, it can get you high, and high THC cannabis can get you high, and not everyone likes that, and it is definitely a side effect. Sometimes it's the effect people are looking for, but as a medicine, it is a limiting factor to people who don't want to experience that. But the safety profile of even just straight up smoked herbal cannabis is just dramatically better than most, if not all, prescription medicines.
No, that's the thing
that's not overstated. It's an incredibly safe medicine. Even these places, in California, I've got a colleague in Southern California who sees a lot of patients, and is the director of Bonnie Goldstein. She's the director of a Canna Centers clinic set up in California, and she and I were talking recently about this up at the Emerald Cup in Santa Rosa, and she was talking about some of the instances where patients have quote unquote overdosed, right? An overdose on cannabis is not impossible, especially with these high potency concentrates,
right?
Rather sort of highly concentrated extracts.
Yeah.
But we've grown up with a notion of overdose being equivalent to a fatality.
Right.
And that's the thing that more and more everybody realizes, that you can't do that with cannabis. It can't kill you. And you
can fall over and hit your head on a rock. I've seen a fella do that before.
Yeah,
sure.
That's about it, right?
Yeah, well, it could contribute to accidents, and if you have a high-speed vehicle and a death wish, then it could, I guess, contribute. But you see what I mean as a medical argument, and this is just something that everybody realizes now. Whereas acetaminophen, Tylenol, is people pop that all the time. Doctors recommend it all the time. I'm not going to knock it as bad medicine, but it's probably the biggest single cause of liver toxicity in this country.
Wow.
In any single bottle of over-the-counter Tylenol, you could sentence yourself to a slow, painful death of liver failure if you threw down that whole bottle or half of it. We deal with toxic medicines all the time, and cannabis is so much less so. It's remarkable. And yet the science that makes the biggest splash, the science that and it's in my realm of neuroscience, that always makes the biggest splash on the AP wire and in the local news, and you get government luminaries citing it when they're worried about reforming cannabis policy. It's the neuroscience of addiction and insanity, for example, to cite one or two studies that have been extraordinarily hyped these last couple years. One is a study that was out of Duke University, but was looking at a population of a long-term research project in Dunedin, New Zealand, and they looked at data of this big long-term project and concluded that people who started using cannabis not only recreationally but in very high doses daily before the age of 15 and proceeded to use it on such a high level for years and years and years, they reported like an 8-point drop in IQ that was sustained, through adulthood. And this has been hyped so much.
I feel certain alcohol could do the same sort of damage quite easily.
Oh, and it's objectively true. Alcohol can cause so much damage to your brain and does to so many people. But, and that's the thing. Why do so many people fall back on that? I mean, alcohol is definitively more dangerous than cannabis, whether you're talking about risk of accidents or direct consequence neurologically, or the fact that someone addicted, a daily addict, alcoholic can actually die from withdrawal, whereas someone who's a very long-term cannabis smoker can stop and is most likely just going to suffer irritability, insomnia, crankiness, the kind of thing that you have when you quit a long-term coffee habit and it goes away. Alcohol is so much definitively more dangerous than cannabis, and prohibition is more dangerous than alcohol, and we know this. So how much more dangerous is prohibition than a mature approach to adult use of cannabis?
And that's where the political question comes in, where it was weird because, as we said, there are always going to be the freaks. I think he was, if I'm not mistaken, was Chris Christie, who's, was a president. Is he still Is he still in the run for president?
He quit a couple days ago.
Yeah, he was in the run for the presidential, for the Republican primaries. He was like, if I become a chief executive, I'm going to enforce federal law on the states. Basically, I'm going to shut down the whole state medical programs, all of that stuff. So you have that extreme.
Yeah.
And that part doesn't surprise me because, you're always going to have guys who are just batshit crazy who are going to say things that are in direct contradiction with all of the evidence. I get that part. I don't even mind it that much. Well, I mind it if they actually gain power, but, until then is some crazy guy just spouting stuff off. The part that I find disturbing is what you brought up, is the fact that when you do have a possible bill to alter this, it's not that you don't have the support of the crazy guys like Chris Christie, is you don't have the support of anybody. I mean, even of people who have really nothing to lose by supporting it, because if you look at more progressive politicians, pretty much their entire constituency would be in favor. There would be no real setback, there would be no... Because, I'm a realist about it. I understand that 30 years ago, if you propose rescheduling or getting marijuana completely out of the schedule, you would have just sunk your political career. I get it, So even though maybe privately you believe, sure, we could do that, as a politician, you don't do it. But that's not the case anymore, so I don't...
right now, people accuse Bernie Sanders of doing it to appeal to the popular vote. like it's a tactic.
Right,
And
except
he's
that no
going
one
very
else does. It's like everybody else could do that. It wouldn't be really that difficult.
Well, how common are these? You see these amazing stories where some family has to travel 800 miles to get their daughter, one treatment of some great CBD. I don't know how you would give it to a child. It's just like Marinol down sort of thing. But however, you get like these epilepsy kids where they're locked in position until they get this medicine, and they turn into regular kids. I mean, that's not just infrequent, is it? Are you seeing that all the time? Is that something we need to get pictures and video of, how much better these kids could be if only they had the opportunity, and put it in these people's faces so that they know how amazing these treatments are? Or is that just sort of the whole other spectrum, and they're not that effective? Or is it that effective? What have you seen?
Well, in some cases it is. And I mean, if people just picking this up or whatever, I should clarify. I'm not a clinician, but I study this field very actively. And so, yes, people should be looking at those videos. In states where there's obstinance, recalcitrance to accepting even low THC cannabis as medicine, they absolutely should look at those videos. We're learning more and more. I mean, this CBD phenomenon is amazing. Not 15 years ago, people from cannabis breeders to other, sort of institutional academic scientists thought that the cannabidiol molecule CBD was such a minority compound that had been basically sort of bred out of the plant by the black market clandestine cannabis industry that has selectively bred for high THC for so many years. And there's just wonderful stories about how high CBD or CBD-rich strains were rediscovered. And it gives me a moment of thought to sort of direct people to my friends at projectcbd.org, a wonderful organization, Project CBD, founded by Martin Lee and Fred Gardner, two guys I've known for many years because Fred was going to International Cannabinoid Research Society meetings when I started back in the late 90s, and he's been a stalwart sort of journalist. Both of CBD was a forerunner to understanding that CBD as a non-psychoactive, at least it's not psychoactive like THC is, but it's very medicinal, was going to be a game changer in people's perceptions, and it has been. And I urge people to look at projectcbd.org and their wonderful list, well-curated list of therapeutic uses of cannabis. But that, so that said, how did getting to your question of like the miracle drug phenomenon, and what's really changed things is the highly publicized clinical experiments with high CBD cannabis that, of course, became wildly popularized with the CNN special by Dr. Sanjay Gupta, who profiled the case of Charlotte Fiji in Colorado. And Charlotte, she is a patient who has the kind of juvenile intractable epilepsy that responds extraordinarily well in many cases to the cannabidiol molecule. We're coming to understand that there are some cases of epilepsy, especially these very traditionally difficult to treat, intractable epilepsy syndromes that respond very well to cannabinoids, including CBD. Dravet syndrome, I believe, is what Charlotte Fiji had, and there are some others that, when I say intractable, it means the existing anti-epileptic drugs fail fairly miserably with these young children who have just catastrophic seizure disorders, dozens or even hundreds of seizures a day, which is just hard to even imagine. It's basically a child seizing at a near constant rate, and of course this has terrible effect on the neurological development of a child. And in short, children with Dravet syndrome, for example, respond really well to CBD-rich cannabis. And I have heard from a number of patients that having some THC present is important, but those results are so dramatic because the symptomology of a seizure is so dramatic and it's so visible. And sometimes, there are dozens and dozens of patients who have seen dramatic improvements, dramatic, immediate, I'm going to have a life now responses to working with extracts of the cannabis plant. And that's shifted things. And that's why parents leave states and become medical refugees to go to Colorado. Although shortages there have been problematic. It's not, it can be frustrating. Here in Florida, we're one of the states that the legislature, upon pressure from parents groups and following the wave of popular eye-opening that came from Dr. Gupta's special, they passed a law with a compassionate use handle to allow low THC cannabis. They got around the Scheduling Act by legally redefining low THC cannabis as some different plant. It's not cannabis anymore if it has less than 0.8% THC, which becomes kind of absurd for different reasons, being a scientist. But so the legislature in Florida passed a low THC cannabis law, but it's been mired down with a program that has never really been designed to be implemented well for patient access. They've been more concerned with what businesses benefit, who's going to get into the game of growing it. I won't go into all those details right now, but it's been really unfortunate. Whereas also in 2014, Florida had an amendment, the ballot proposition that got onto the ballot in 2014 to allow cannabis as medicine, a medical marijuana amendment. In Florida, that ballot proposition, there's no vehicle for it except to amend the Constitution. And that medical marijuana amendment received 58% of the popular vote in a conservative-leaning state with a conservative-leaning turnout. But in Florida, you have to have 60% supermajority to get a ballot, an amendment passed to the state constitution. And so in this state, it is resoundingly clear on the ballot box, in polls that regularly, objective academic polls regularly show upwards of 85% of Floridians support the use of cannabis as medicine with doctor supervision. And most politicians in Tallahassee, by my estimation, feel no pressure to do anything about it.
So what happened with the 58? I mean, if 85% seemed to be the popular opinion, why, when it came to the polls, it turned out to be 58?
That was the legislators.
For one thing, it was just a rocket. The voter turnout is so pathetic. It just makes you want to hang your head in shame when you see pictures of all over the world of people lining up to exercise democracy, and we have like an 11% voter turnout.
11%? I'm sorry, try that again? You have 11?
That's not that. I don't have it was very low. The voter turnout was abysmal.
Wow.
It's just so pathetic. But also, it just became such a horse and pony show. The state, the opposition to it was led by this Las Vegas casino magnate, Sheldon Adelson, who puts a lot into conserve. He pumped millions of dollars in the last minute on attack ads. And the things they did, I mean, they're just so over the top wrong.
Reefer madness craziness.
It was reefer madness. It was racist. It was like images of young black men in hoodies, like going to be, oh yeah, these are caretakers.
They might play jazz. Watch out.
Oh, patients were stigmatized. Caregivers were stigmatized as drug dealers. Physicians who would do it were stigmatized as enabling bad behavior. There were ads with, insinuating that medical cannabis would be used as a date rape drug. It was really sustain. And also, I mean, I think some of the strategizing on behalf of the group that was pushing it made it a little bit too much about the people who were pushing the amendment. They didn't do enough of what you just said, Rich, putting the faces of patients up front and center. And it became sort of a Democrat versus Republican thing. And I'm convinced that the real clincher was that it was an amendment to the Constitution. And groups like the Tampa Bay Times, a major newspaper here in St. Pete, they editorialized, and I know from people on the inside that this was a heated decision, but they put out an editorial saying this is the right thing for public policy to move towards, but it should not be chiseled into the stone of the state constitution. The legislature needs to hear this call to action and do something by statute. And they failed in such royal they didn't. But that kept people from voting because they thought, there's going to be pressure. It should be done in the legislature, not at the ballot box.
Wow. Well, okay, so Florida politics, craziness. National politics, lots of craziness, because again, the fact that there is despite overwhelming scientific support, there's, couple of guys, the Bernie Sanders of the world who are pushing it with no support even from progressive politicians. That's pretty weird. But, let's leave the mystery of politics aside. Let's go back, I guess, to the medical science of it all.
Yeah.
For about the 3 people among our listeners who don't know what we're talking about when we say CBD, THC, of course, CBD strains, just to oversimplify, do have medical values such as the ones he was mentioning for kids with seizures and a bunch of other stuff, but do not get you high. So they really don't qualify as a drug per se under every level. Whereas the THC heavy strains are the ones that have the effect that most people who smoke it recreationally are seeking for. It's the heavy high that you get from the THC.
It's funny, there were bales and bales of low THC cannabis available in Nashville in the late 80s.
Because nobody walks. Of course, nobody's looking for it. Yeah, of course.
Weed coming from Mexico.
Yeah, Mexicali dirt weed, yeah.
So to give us a quick, simple breakdown for people, what are the main things that are being used for? Like, in what fields of, what diseases, what problems are treated with CBD heavy strains versus THC heavy strains, differences between the two in terms of what they seem to be effective at, combinations, so, kind of give us the breakdown of marijuana as medicine, what is it used for, and of course, because there's no such thing as marijuana, as we said, there are a bunch of different chemicals within it, CBD and THC being some of the main ones, but by no means the only ones. What's the difference between the various types of cannabis and what kind of effect do they have as medicine?
Yeah. Well, part of the punchline to this story, I think it's very important to list some things, and I will. But part of the punchline is that people wanting to embrace normalization of this as medicine, and physicians wanting to learn more, they want to be armed with saying, hey, somebody's just come into my office with multiple sclerosis and they're starting to have pain and spasticity. What's the strain I should get for them? Mm-hmm. And part of the challenge cannabis is a more holistic medicine, an herbalistic approach. And the fact that our endocannabinoid system is different from person to person in a sense. It may not be so easy to say this strain is a strain that works for you for multiple sclerosis. Another strain might work better for a different patient with the same indication. Mm-hmm. So I think increasingly people who are savvy or on the forefronts of this are saying this is a medicine that really needs to be taken as you're treating the person with the disease and not the disease. You can't just say that someone with neuropathic pain will respond to a 4-to-1 CBD to THC ratio, and this kind of OG Kush works for that, And I just cited a strain name, so people in California would be like, he doesn't know what he's talking about.
So how would somebody go about it? Like, would they have to test multiple strains to see which ones seem to respond with your particular problem? Yes.
There's a lot of patient information out there. There's There's a much growing sophisticated dialogue of people who have tried. There are a lot of good caregivers in California especially, many of whom have websites and discuss these kinds of things at length. But as a real general overview, and I'm not a clinician, though I have many conversations advising people, I think that the way cannabis as medicine is succeeding well, where it is, a patient would naturally try, unless it's someone who's well experienced with cannabis and knows that they get along just fine with the THC high, that individual may start off with pretty strong doses of THC. But for many people who are not interested in the cannabis high, or afraid of it, or they've tried it, they know they don't like it, but they're interested in looking at this therapeutically, the ability, which is not the ability to get CBD-rich strains or extracts that are heavier on are predominantly CBD and low THC is certainly a good way to start. Now, not everyone has that selection. From state to state.
Sure. No, we really have a gift out here. Especially some of the better collectives really do have it down to a science. They know what to recommend to people. And the high CBD. So I always want to say CDB. We're not talking about the Charlie Daniels band here. It's a whole different thing. But it seems like, there's even posters on the wall now where if you're more looking for something, you don't want the high and you just want the pain relief, or I don't know if the pain relief isn't completely attached to the CBD, is it? Is it a combination?
No, it's not. So I should get back to Daniele's question a little more deliberately. So we know THC is really good for things. Okay, nausea, that's something that's FDA approved. Dronabinol, which is Marinol, is a pill that's approved for nausea related to chemotherapy. The nausea you get when you're poisoning yourself with chemotherapy, THC can help, and can help very quickly. And there's so many stories about that. Lester Grinspoon comes to mind, writing in the 70s with Marijuana Reconsidered, about how his child with cancer smoked cannabis for the first time and instantly had an appetite. So nausea and appetite is something that having THC around is important for. Controlling pain. THC and CBD both have evidence, at least in preclinical animal studies, in controlling pain. And so you have certain kinds of pains like chronic pain, whether it's recovering from injury, where you've got chronic inflammatory related pain, or what we call neuropathic pain that can happen with injury, or with diabetes, or with HIV, where viral infection leads to nerve damage. And you have neuropathic pain, meaning your nerve cells are sending you signals of pain when they really shouldn't be. Cannabinoids are good for that, and THC is there's much better evidence for THC being helpful for that than CBD. So those chronic pain states where opiates are not as good. Opiates as medicine are very useful, especially for acute pain, but not so much for chronic maintained pain. With your back surgeries and injuries and what have you. Then there's issues of seizures I mentioned, and CBD seems very effective for these juvenile, genetically determined severe epilepsies. Less so for epilepsies that come on later in life, but I think that we should definitely be more openly pursuing, looking at whole plant cannabis medicine to allow people to search for what might work for them. Multiple sclerosis and other spastic disorders, and neurodegenerative disorders like Lou Gehrig's disease, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, ALS. Cannabis can be used very therapeutically effectively for that. And when I say these things, there are so many catch-22s in cannabis research, but many of which are well known. And there's a mountain of preclinical animal research and observations that get lumped into what we call anecdotal evidence. But sort of that gold standard clinical trial study, there are not very many, maybe 10, 11 studies. It's there, For example, Dr. Don Abrams at University of UCSF, San Francisco, directed a number of really good gold standard placebo-controlled double-blind trials with smoked cannabis. And this would be something that predominantly would have more THC than CBD, was effective in controlling painful neuropathies and spasticities in an HIV population. Again, this is the gold standard trial that clinicians and the FDA say they want. Patients didn't know what they were getting, and there are smoked cannabis preparations that don't have any THC in them, and that was a placebo. They didn't know what they were getting. The caregiver didn't know what was being given, and the data was all parsed out. And when they were given active cannabis, the pain was very pronounced. They had great pain control. When they switched to placebo, unbeknownst to them, they lost pain control, and vice versa. So there have been really good studies with neuropathic pain. There have been good suggestive studies with the control of spasticity and pain in multiple sclerosis. Some of this comes from the product Sativex, which is a extract marketed by GW Pharmaceuticals out of the UK. It's basically a 1-to-1 THC to cannabidiol ratio that they create by mixing a couple of different strains, a couple of different extracts. They've had pretty good success, but I think that in that work with Sativex and with what other people see with whole plant cannabis and in different patient populations is that you get some patients who respond really well, and this could be a great medicine for you, and other patients not so much.
What about the whole Rick Simpson Phoenix Tear thing? The whole Rick Simpson having become famous for claiming that his experience with THC, very heavy strains, is a cure for cancer, that he was able to heal himself, he was able to heal other people. The claims are obviously sound fantastic because cancer is such probably the big killer of the age right now. And, you have this guy saying super heavy THC strains have been shown to kill cancer, to cure it. His regimen is pretty intense because he requires people to take 60 grams of super THC heavy oil on a 90-day period, which is kind of, it's brutal, 1 gram a day. At one point when you graduate to 1 gram a day, 1 gram a day of THC is, I don't know, man, it's like, that's some heavy stuff right there. But it's a
huge dose.
Yeah, it's an insane heavy amount of THC that I'm even wondering, how do you even build a tolerance to get to that? Because it's like...
Well, slowly. You build a tolerance slowly, and these are formulated in various oils. With those kinds of concentrations, is a very viscous oil. Mm-hmm. And same thing the way high CBD is delivered to kids and others. People trying to use high-dose cannabinoids, whether it's CBD or THC, it's typically going to be a thick, viscous oil delivered by sort of a 1 milliliter syringe that's placed under the tongue, and a lot of it gets absorbed through the lining of the mouth, but it also gets swallowed and absorbed in that way through ingestion. Certainly, how to approach this? I guess part of the way to say it is I have come around to very much believe that THC has anti-cancer properties and CBD has anti-cancer properties. Honestly, as a scientist, I think I do a pretty natural job of really wanting to see evidence. Mm-hmm. And with some of those early claims with Rick Simpson oil and others, I was skeptical for various reasons. Partly because the messaging with some of that, and I'm not intending necessarily to point it directly at one group or another. The messaging of it can be, this healed me and it will heal you, and it can cure every cancer. And what he was talking about, running for the cure. Cannabis is not a cure-all for cancer. Cancer is not a single disease. Even one person's cancer in their body is probably 3 or 4 different kinds of cancers. That's the level of sort of sophistication that oncology has today. And it's real. But and also with that particular sort of Rick Simpson oil process, I was skeptical because a lot of what they were presenting on videos were not clinical evidence. They were pictures of someone with a lesion on their face, and then a before and after picture, which may not have ever been a properly biopsied tumor.
Right.
And I knew oncologists and clinicians that were begging to get involved with studying these things, and there was some of the players involved with marketing that, and for probably understandable reasons, being a criminal activity, didn't get involved with that. I know physicians, I know cancer physicians who have had patients come in, and this I first learned of this some years ago. I'd be interested to get reacquainted with it, but I've heard direct clinical stories of patients with very treatable forms of skin cancer, for example, cancers that have a very good response rate, turning down conventional medicine with this notion of conventional medicine is just poison, and I'm going to go with Mama Ganja and get these high extracts and try it, and they die. And I don't mean to color this. I mean, I don't mean to overstate this either, but those are cases of people whose lives ended out of the sense that these high THC cannabis extracts were a cure-all. And I think that's a tragedy, because I think people should work with physicians because there's a lot of intelligence about how to address cancer. Now, that said, yeah, a lot of traditional hospital-based cancer therapy is a carpet bombing of your body. And moreover, I mean, here I'm playing the devil's advocate a little bit, but, case studies keep popping up of people who really did have cancer, and children who have gliomas that either go away or are suspended, or their survival is greatly increased. And in cancer therapy, if maintaining survival 6 months, a year, 2 years, that's considered a cure, or at least the best that we have. And I know people who've kept their daughter alive with cannabis. I know I've met people, and I've heard firsthand stories of people who had clinician diagnosed, brain imaging diagnosed cancers, some of them intractable, sent home to die, and they went with this stupefying level of THC, these high level extracts that you definitely have to slowly wean yourself up, and still it's going to be a very psychoactive, if not incapacitating dose. But when you're fighting off cancer,
yeah,
is that something you're going to do?
Sure.
And it's saved lives, and it's cured cancers. And the thing is, there's lots of animal research to support it. There's piles and piles of animal research. And there's a wonderful documentary out on the sort of life and work of Professor Raphael Mechoulam from Israel, who everyone in the field knows. I mean, we're all sort of disciples to Raphael Mechoulam. He discovered the chemical structure of THC and cannabidiol 50 years ago, and in the 90s he discovered anandamide. He's done 100 different important studies in between and since. And there's a wonderful documentary. It's available. You can find it free online, called The Scientist. And somebody watching that for an hour will get much more educated about this than listening to me. Not that your podcast isn't awesome, but it's a wonderful documentary. And it pops into my head because one of the things that Dr. Mechoulam says near the end of that documentary, talking about cancer, he says, is cannabis a cure for cancer? No, or at least I don't know. I don't know if it is. But if I were a mouse, I'm paraphrasing Rafi, if I were a mouse, cannabis could cure any cancer I have. That's the kind of preclinical support we have. The kind of work that's been done in mice, breast cancer, lung cancer, brain cancer, many different types of tumors, the kind of work that has been done in animal models to support THC and CBD as anti-tumor fighting compounds is so much that if they were proprietary compounds, they would have been moved into human clinical trials years and years and years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not. There are still no active clinical trials in humans to let them try high-dose organic sun-grown cannabis to fight their tumors. Why not? People are doing it anyway. Study it.
Right. No, absolutely. So I guess the thing is, part of what makes this complicated is the fact that, as you say, there's such a clash between, on one end, you have the cases of the people who go and, doctors have given up hope and they take certain strain in heavy doses and boom, they're healed. Then you get the other person who does the same thing and end up dying. And you're like, wait, what happened?
Right.
There's not a one-to-one equation here where, you do this, you get this result. So I think that's where part of the confusion comes in, is because, as you said, cancer is not one disease, it's multiple, and cannabis is not one plant, is a gazillion different variations depending on the strain. So figuring out the right match between the strain and your particular body and your particular issue, that's where the art comes in, and it's kind of the Wild West out there, because it's not that there's exactly a super clear knowledge of what needs to be done. I mean, maybe there are some amazing clinicians out there, but it seems like there's a lot of guesswork involved.
There's more and more. I mean, we're living in an age of molecular medicine. And I mean, for example, like with kids with these catastrophic epilepsies, I mean, the mutation is recognized in some of these cases, like Dravet syndrome. You could get a DNA test of your child before they're even born and realize that their disorder will be amenable to treatment with cannabis. I'm not sure that I mean, I shouldn't have used that specific example because you don't typically know that that's coming at all. But with cancer, for example, a research article just came out on the 16th of this month. I actually just pulled it up on my laptop. I'm looking at it. In a open access peer-reviewed journal called BMC Cancer, Biomed Central Cancer. People can find this online, about dronabinol, which is THC, synthetic THC, preferentially having anti-leukemic activity in lymphoblastic leukemia, and it's mostly a mouse study and in leukemia cell lines and culture. But they do tremendous mechanistic work. This is from an oncology unit in a hospital in Germany, because this is an international thing. But they do tremendous multifaceted mechanistic work to show that THC has anti-proliferative effects. It has pro-apoptotic effects, which means it stimulates cancer cells to go into a suicide, a programmed cell death. And they even, in this one paper that's mostly work with cell lines, they have data from observational data with patients who were given high THC and controlled their lymphoblastic leukemia, as opposed to another kind of leukemia called myeloblast leukemia, where it's less effective. If we would unshackle the power of modern molecular genetic research to really research this stuff, it could be yielding so much more progress towards improving the quality and longevity of life in cancer patients. I mean, it's just so astounding that researchers this should be literally the most prohibited substance to work with. It's just mind-blowing.
No, in fact, that part is where the politics come back in, and it's insane. And I mean, granted, there's been huge strides made in the last 20 years with medical marijuana becoming legal in many more states, more doctors being willing to try out, So there is, baby steps still compared to where we need to go, for sure. So if you say, cancer being one of the big modern killers, where it's hard to go around anywhere talking to somebody who either they didn't have it or they don't know somebody who had it, what would be you personally? What's your take on it? Do you take anything preventively, like on a regular basis, whether CBD oils or THC oils, or do you feel that that's kind of a shot in the dark, so you might as well just play your chances, see if something comes up, then worry about figuring out what the right strain is? What's your personal, for yourself, I guess, more than recommend to anybody else, what's your answer to that?
Well, I think that, I mean, honestly, uh, the shift that's occurring that I believe in, I mean, that resonates with me from studying this for half my life, is that cannabis, a moderate use of cannabis in your life can be part of one's approach to wellness. And this stated as casually as that can trigger all kinds of alarm bells with people who are entrenched in this, other prohibition paradigm.
Right.
But, a lot of people I think could do very well with, for example, what we'd call microdosing.
Mm-hmm.
THC and cannabidiol have potent anti-inflammatory properties. Mm-hmm. And more, the study of neurological disease like age-related dementias, or Alzheimer's, and age-related other neurological disorders like Parkinson's disease, or Huntington's, which is entirely genetically predisposed. But in these various neurological conditions, and in systemic inflammatory conditions like rheumatoid diseases, arthritis, chronic inflammation is the problem.
Yeah.
Chronic inflammation in your blood vessels, in your arterial walls, leads to atherosclerosis and cardiovascular disease, the number one cause of death and lack of productivity in this country. And these are all consequences of pro-inflammatory challenges to our body. I mean, many of them lifestyle choices. I mean, they're just the garbage that people have been conditioned to eat in this country, and sedentary lifestyles and what have you. But low-dose cannabis on a daily basis, I think, would improve the aging process and quality of life for a great many people. And that's controversial. The trustees of my college might be like, "What is he saying?" But that's the way I see it. If I were living in a state where I had the liberty to be an adult with one of the safest plants on the planet, I would probably have a little bit every day.
What, by a little bit, are we talking about smoking? Are we talking about oil? Are we talking about more CBD heavy, more THC heavy? What would be let's say you live in California tomorrow, what would you do?
I wish I could tell you that I've had enough experiments to know with so much that's been out there in California, but I would favor having some THC around. I think some people would like to just take cannabidiol, oil extracts as a supplement, like sublingual spray or something. Yeah. There are great products out there. I mean, I'm friends with folks involved with Care by Design, for example, is a company that makes really great CBD-rich products, some of which are just not going to get you high, but may be good daily anti-inflammatory sort of vitamin. People like Ed Rosenthal, who has been writing about cannabis with his own name for probably longer than anybody who's presently alive. And Ed's been saying for years it should be viewed as a vitamin. Not everybody's going to want THC, but you build a tolerance to it. I mean, people who... So
you're thinking both routes are valid, both the just CBD spray or oil route that doesn't get you high, or sort of low THC and slowly build up. And so personally, you would go more the THC route, but you feel that there are benefits in both. Am I reading it correctly?
There are benefits in both. And there are so many ways now with the sophistication of vaporizers and discrete little vape pens that can be used to deliver high THC, low THC, no THC. It can be our society could evolve, at least in little micro pockets where these things are going on. I mean, it is happening,
right?
And it could be a supplement to wellness. I think the area where there's concern and what gets thrown out as the bugaboo, that's the boogeyman that we're all scared of, even to let cancer patients have cannabis. It all falls, the argument, as we talked about earlier, I mean, and what's going on, like in the politics here in Florida, it's not like the people are standing up and saying, no, marijuana is not medicine anymore. I mean, some people do because they're just completely ignorant.
Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, that's not the crux of the argument. Nobody educated on the subject says that there's no medicinal values.
Right.
They say that the side effects are too problematic,
Mm-hmm.
and that there's too much of a risk that it's going to get out, and we would be condoning somebody's bad behavior. So the worry of condoning some stonehead's bad behavior is seen as a counterbalance to keep a war veteran crippled by PTSD from smoking herb.
Yeah, no, that's in fact that's where the insanity of it all comes in. But no, and I think we kill the proverbial dead horse and beat him plenty about the stupidity of policy right now and how we definitely need to change it. I guess my one last question for now about some of these would be people who are on board, people who are already saying yes, sign me up. Clearly, it's different state to state, because in some states you have options, in some states you don't. But the where do they go part, because the reality is that not all collectives are the same, not all products are the same. There are things that are marketed as something where really they haven't been grown the proper way, or they have been using chemicals in the process of turning it into oil that are not there's so much variety even about that, right? Where certain things have to be advertised as one product, where they really aren't, where they really aren't. Who do you trust in terms of, you are interested, you want to experiment with some of the CBD oils or the THC oils? Who do you go to?
Yeah, well, I mean, it varies from place to place, but these are major. I mean, I guess I won't answer that question so much as say that's a very important question for people to think about. I think that consumers, regardless of what the medical indication is, consumers should do their very best to demand reputable lab testing.
Right.
Which is part of what can create a whole robust industry around this to make the economic argument about cannabis as medicine. Reliable lab testing, and not just to say, hey, high THC, low THC, but pesticides.
Right.
That's a huge problem.
Yep.
I mean, it gets more and more of attention, but it's still understated how many pesticides are used in cannabis, and not only get maintained, but with concentrates can become more concentrated.
Yep.
There was some really great investigative journalism by the Oregonian newspaper last summer on this, and there are other things. Busts in Washington, busts in Colorado, people using these systemic fungicides because they're growing a big grow of cannabis, and they get trounced by a fungus, and it's a cost benefit ratio. They pump in these pesticides, and I really worry about the health risks from that.
Absolutely, because you're
people
there.
Buying CBD oils sometimes have no way of knowing. These are imported hemp paste products that are coming from China and Eastern Europe. And if it's got a sticker on it that says this batch was tested and clean, how do you know? I mean, this is why it all needs to be above ground.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
A robust market, and not just with the mindset of heavy-handed regulation, but with a strong transparency in where things are going, or having the liberty of local home grows, if you will, or knowing really where your medicine is coming from right from the ground.
Exactly, and that's the other part to add to the complexity of this whole debate. No, it's totally fascinating. It's clearly, for everything we bring up, which is valuable, it raises 3 more questions, but I think that's where the research and all the once things become more legal and more of these questions can actually be answered, which would help it quite dramatically. Anything else, Greg, that you want to throw out there?
Well, because I am where I'm at in Florida, and I mentioned the ballot proposition and stuff and amendments, that this medical marijuana amendment 2 has gotten enough signatures to be back on the ballot in Florida in November. And whether here or other states, we really do have a lot of people who are still in the position of needing to understand that cannabis is real medicine.
Mm-hmm.
It's not jive. It really is medicinal. There's much to learn about how to tailor it to the individual, what strain or what formulation works for someone. But it's been such a remarkable journey for me to absorb over these years all of the therapeutic potential for cannabis, and it's not going away. The tide is changing in many countries all over the world who are beginning to understand this, and it's a legit and safe medicine, and moving forward with policy that isn't based in fearful programming is just really important. So the science is so grounded, and it needs to move into human clinical studies. But the science of studying these endocannabinoids has just not only informed us about how cannabis works and that it's medicine, it's taught us an awful lot about how our biology works.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, understanding of like circuit level plasticity, how learning and memory works, how the brain has resilience to injury, how the immune system adapts and changes itself. The endocannabinoids are so involved with these things. I mean, they're not the whole story, but they're so involved that it's really, we're not just changing paradigms in sort of a legalization sense. We're changing paradigms of how the connections and the circuits in your brain work, because the endocannabinoid system is so involved with that. And, it's not just that cannabis has been used a long time that makes it good medicine. Mm-hmm. As I've heard in debates, doctors have thrown this at me. Well, we've used foxglove and digitalis as a medicine too, but that doesn't mean people should grow foxglove and use it because it's deadly. But it's not just that cannabis has been used a long time and has ancient evidence for use that makes it good medicine. It's not just that it grows from the ground and that God made it that makes it good medicine. Mm-hmm. But it's been used for thousands of years. It's survived across dozens of cultural transitions and has been cherished and cultivated. Its properties have been selected. We humans have evolved cannabis to mm-hmm. where it's at, and the kind of a deeper conversation for another time is whether cannabis has influenced human evolution. But we definitely have a mutualistic relationship, and have for millennia, that humans help the cannabis plant spread around the globe, and the cannabis plant has helped humans be resilient to the various injuries and chronic damage of life. And if we have a more holistic view about that, then the future of cannabis medicine is very big and very real.
Beautiful, man. Well, thank you so much for the lesson.
Come on.
Thank you for everything.
It's a great pleasure.
Well, the funky music means one thing, that's the end of another fine episode of the Drunken Taoist podcast. I'm going to quickly thank our affiliate sponsors, Audible.com. Get yourself a book to listen to on your long ride on a train or in the car, as if it's possible for you ever to be tired of podcasts. But this is a great way to get your read on while you're riding. Curacao chocolates, amazing, healthy chocolate treats. And if you're going to order something from Amazon, please click through our Amazon portal on our donation page at the Drunken Taoist. It enables us to get a tiny little piece of everything that is bought. It costs you nothing extra. It's just Amazon trying to give back to things you like. And it's quite an amazing thing, and it helps us out in big time. Daisy House Music, of course, for their fine theme song. It really is the signature sound of the Drunken Taoist, and we appreciate it, guys. Another great album from them is out and available at bandcamp.com. Check it out, daisyhousebandcamp.com. It's called Western Man. So I have a proper botchering for you guys from Bolelli next week. From those of you who've donated over the past 2 or 3 weeks, we'll add that to our list for next time. And that's about it. This has been a long episode, and the summer's over, so we'll be reunited from his amazing trip to Italy and then from the mountains of California. I'm sure I'll have great stories about that, and we'll have all sorts of things to chat about. So see you guys next time, and thanks for listening as always.
And so ends another awesome episode of the Drunken Taoist podcast. Be sure to keep your ears peeled for another mind-expanding episode coming soon. We'll be tweeting you as soon as they come out. You can keep track of Daniel at D Bolelli. That's DBOLELLI. And you can find me on Twitter at Richimon1. That's RICHIMON, the numeral 1. See y'all soon.
Maybe I don't want to hear this.
No, you don't.
In questo caso le provvidenze di Dio.
Duncan showed you the way, yeah?
Oh, man, isn't that scary to think?
Nice. So don't kill people, do that instead. I have nothing against chicken other than the fact that they are ugly and weird and strange.
This was great. It's fucking awesome.
And I love this conversation.
We've been having a great hour here.
Dun, dun, dun.
I completely got lost. Are we doing the outro or the intro?
We're outroing.
Oh, we're outro. Okay, sorry. So let's continue. Did you ever see the movie Tombstone with Val Kilmer and...
Your accent, it just, whatever that movie is you were trying to tell
Can
me
you
about.
translate for me, please?
I believe the word was tombstone.
Yeah, that one, exactly. Just as I was saying, Tombstone. What do I have to do? One day the rod shall teach you.
Get back to work!